Letter 18 is about sexual temptation. My dear Wormwood, even under Slubgob, you must have learned at college the routine technique of sexual temptation. And since, for us spirits, this whole subject is one of considerable tedium, though necessary as part of our training, I will pass it over. But on the larger issues involved, I think you have a good deal to learn. The enemy's demand on humans takes the form of a dilemma, either complete abstinence or unmitigated monogamy. So either you're completely abstaining from sex or you're in a marriage and you're committed to one person, right? It's either or. That's what Screwtape is saying here. Ever since our father's first great victory, we have rendered the former very difficult to them. So that's like a reference to Adam and Eve from the book of Genesis. The latter, for the last few centuries, we have been closing up as a way of escape. We have done this through the poets and novelists by persuading the humans that a curious and usually short-lived experience, which they call being in love, is the only respectable ground for marriage, that marriage can and ought to render this excitement permanent, and that a marriage which does not do so is no longer binding. This idea is our parody of an idea that came from the enemy. Here, Screwtape says that the demons, their main objective has been to convince humans of this idea of being in love, and you can only get married if you have this like feeling of being in love, and once that feeling leaves you, then the marriage should be over. And this goes back to some of the other letters in the Screwtape letters which talk about the idea of like emotions. And marriage shouldn't just be built on the idea of love or just be built on the emotion of love, because people change and you grow, and there are tough days, and there might be tough days like where you're not feeling, quote unquote, right, that love towards someone, that romantic love, but you still care about them as a person. And so you would want to work through that. And whether that's one day or whether that is getting into marriage counseling, right? But here he's saying, the demons don't want people to realize that a marriage needs a firm foundation, that a marriage needs more than the feeling of love. He wants everyone to just focus on that feeling of love, and not realize what it actually takes to make a real marriage work and what a real marriage should be built upon. The whole philosophy of hell rests on recognition of the axiom that one thing is not another thing, and especially that one self is not another self. My good is my good, and your good is yours, right? Basically, like everyone's out for themselves. What one gains, another loses. Even an inanimate object is what it is by excluding all other objects from the space it occupies. If it expands, it does so by thrusting other objects aside or by absorbing them. A self does the same. With beasts, the absorption takes the form of eating. For us, it means the sucking of will and freedom out of a weaker self into a stronger. To be means to be in competition. Now, the enemy's philosophy is nothing more nor less than one continued attempt to evade this very obvious truth. He aims at a contradiction. Things are to be many, yet somehow also one. The good of oneself is to be the good of another. This impossibility he calls love, and this same monotonous panacea can be detected under all he does and even all he is, or claims to be. Thus he is not content, even himself, to be a sheer arithmetical unity. He claims to be three as well as one, in order that this nonsense about love may find a foothold in his own nature. At the other end of the scale, he introduces into matter that obscene invention, the organism, in which the parts are perverted from their natural destiny of competition and made to cooperate. So here, God's philosophy is opposite from hell's, where hell is all about yourself, you getting ahead. It doesn't matter what's happening to anyone else, just take. God's is the opposite. God's is one of generosity and cooperation and love. His real motive for fixing on sex as the method of reproduction among humans is only too apparent from the use he has made of it. Sex might have been, from our point of view, quite innocent. It might have been merely one more mode in which a stronger self preyed upon a weaker, as it is, indeed, among the spiders, where the bride concludes her nuptials by eating her groom. But in the humans, the enemy has gratuitously associated affection between the parties with sexual desire. He has also made the offspring dependent on the parents and given the parents an impulse to support it. thus producing the family, which is like the organism, only worse. For the members are more distinct, yet also united in more conscious and responsible way. The whole thing, in fact, turns out to be simply one more device for dragging in love. So basically, Lewis says, there's nothing sinful about the idea of like love, sexual passion, etc. Right? But it's when it's manipulated, that's when it becomes sinful. And so you go back to that chapter on pleasure, right? God wants us to have pleasure in life. Like he wants us to have all these different things, but it's when it becomes distorted or manipulated, that's when it becomes a sin. And so that's what Lewis is saying here about love and about sex. Now comes the joke. The enemy described a married couple as one flesh. He did not say a happily married couple or a couple who married because they were in love. But you can make the humans ignore that. You can also make them forget that the man they call Paul did not confine it to married couples. Merely copulation for him makes one flesh. That's a reference to 1 Corinthians 6:16. You can thus get the humans to accept as rhetorical eulogies of being in love what were in fact plain descriptions of the real significance of sexual intercourse. The truth is that wherever a man lies with a woman, there, whether they like it or not, a transcendental relationship is set up between them, which must be eternally enjoyed or eternally endured. From the true statement that this transcendental relation was intended to produce, and if obediently entered into, too often will produce, affection in the family, humans can be made to infer the false belief that the blend of affection, fear, and desire, which they call being in love, is the only thing that makes marriage either happy or holy. The error is easy to produce because being in love does very often in Western Europe precede marriages which are made in obedience to the enemy's designs, that is, with the intention of fidelity, fertility, and goodwill. Just as religious emotion very often, but not always, attends conversion. In other words, the humans are to be encouraged to regard as the basis for marriage a highly colored and distorted version of something the enemy really promises as its result. Two advantages follow. In the first place, humans who have not the gift of self-restraint can be deterred from seeking marriage as a solution because they do not find themselves in love, and, thanks to us, the idea of marrying with any other motive seems to them low and cynical. Yes, they think that. They regard the intention of loyalty to a partnership for mutual help, for the preservation of chastity, and for the transmission of life, as something lower than a storm of emotion. Don't neglect to make your man think the marriage service very offensive. In the second place, any sexual infatuation, whatever, so long as it intends marriage, will be regarded as love, and love will be held to excuse a man from all the guilt and protect him from all the consequences of marrying a heathen, a fool, or a wanton. But more of this in my next. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.